Chapter 6. One Step Closer to a Latina Perry Mason. I had no need to apologize that the look wider, search more, affirmative action that Princeton and Yale practiced had opened doors for me. That was its purpose, to create the conditions whereby students from disadvantaged backgrounds could be brought to the starting line of a race many were unaware was even being run. Shortly after graduating, Sonia married her high school sweetheart, Kevin Noonan, in 1976 at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. Sonia changed her name to Sonia Sotomayor de Noonan. They moved into a small apartment, bought a dog they named Star, and continued their studies. Kevin would eventually become a biologist and a patent lawyer. Meanwhile, Sonia applied to and was admitted to one of the most prestigious law schools in the United States, at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. At Yale Law School, the median GPA for applicants was a 3.9, and only 7% of applicants were accepted. It was also one of the very first law schools in the nation to admit women. Being Puerto Rican and a woman could have been affirmative action factors that helped Sonia get into Yale, but her stellar Princeton records would have been grounds for acceptance under any circumstances. She received a full-ride scholarship, launching her law school venture. Even though she hadn't felt comfortable on the progressive and activist-heated campus for her undergraduate studies, she was more than ready to get into law after Princeton. It was what she had been dreaming about since she first watched Perry Mason on television when she was just 10 years old. Ever since those days, she had been mesmerized by the law. This was her chance to make her dream a reality. In Sonia's first year at Yale, her vision of career and purpose started to gel. Her MO, modus operandi, slipped into gear as she began her usual way of getting used to a new environment, slowly. She assessed her situation, her classes, her professors, her classmates, her surroundings, her shortcomings, and her opportunities. It took well over a year to build her confidence and put herself out there. She has said that a diverse but close-knit group of 4 friends in particular, whom she referred to as brothers, served as her anchors. They called her Kid affectionately and offered her academic and social support. They also challenged her. It was a throwback to her high school days in the forensics club. Some of Sonia's best moments in law school were when she and her classmates sat in a lounge talking and debating the issues of the day. When not in class, other students overbooked their schedules with obligations they thought would look good on their resumes, but welcome breaks helped Sonia breathe, gave her brain a break, and helped her passions come to the surface. They talked, they debated, and they developed a deepening sense of themselves, their principles, and the law. Going home to Bronx always grounded Sonia. Her mother welcomed her friends over and whipped up special Puerto Rican dinners with rice, with peas, or pork chops, or just whatever was in the house. It didn't matter. For them, it was a safe haven where they could let loose and talk, discussing the news and class assignments. Sonia worked as a bouncer and bartender at the Graduate and Professional Student Center, GPSC, or better known as the Gypsy, where the job was a great social outlet. It also helped pay her expenses while she studied. Outside the classroom, her confidence grew from aligning herself with extracurricular activities, social justice causes, or organizations like LANA, Yale's Latino, Asian, and Native American student organization. Sonia sought ways to start making her mark. One way to do that was having a well-researched paper published in the Yale Law Journal. The editor at the time, Bill Eskridge, instructed her to bring him a proposal for a possible article. She did. Statehood and the Equal Footing Doctrine, a case for Puerto Rican seabed rights, was published in 1979. Before long, Sonia became editor for the Yale Law Journal and managing editor of the Yale Studies in World Public Order, another publication. Her voice, and perspective on controversial issues became stronger. She was not afraid to speak up for the underdog on issues of affirmative action, discrimination, or unfair practices. In her classes, however, she rarely engaged. That is, until one day, finally, in her third year at law school, she raised her hand in class. She called out her professor. An equation on the board didn't look right to her. It had to do with rules of perpetuity. These rules determined how far in the future a person could leave property to children and grandchildren. She said his example didn't fit the rule. He studied it, said he'd been teaching it for more than 20 years, and that she was right. He had her come up and teach it. At Yale, she felt especially vulnerable because the caliber of students created stiff competition, but years of living as an outsider helped her assess people and situations. Her ability to study an issue, analyze it, and ask questions if she didn't understand it helped her with her studies and in her legal career. Once she got started with a line of questioning, she was like a sponge. She wanted to understand all sides of an issue. Her friends tested her. They tried to compliment her and said she argued like a guy. At first she was offended by the remark, but when they explained, she understood their perspective. Even though the women's movement was going strong during those years, in the classrooms at Yale and other educational institutions, women traditionally didn't speak up. In the classroom, her friends said, female students raised their hands timidly, almost apologetically, to ask a question. But Sonia didn't. Once she built up the courage to ask a question, she was straightforward and direct. No one would ever think she was shy or self-conscious, but it took great effort to shed the protective, self-defensive layers that kept people from seeing the core of her being. I had some measure of self-confidence, but not enough to feel secure among my very brilliant Yale classmates, she said. I spent a whole lot of time in law school feeling inadequate and not quite sure I measured up to the accomplishments of my classmates. Her confidence grew, however, outside the classroom. When she practiced mock trials in a courtroom, she felt right at home. Working alongside attorney mentors who worked for civil rights fueled her passion for serving her community. In mock trial competitions, the Thomas Swan Barristers Union competition in particular, Sonia felt for the first time that she could be an actual lawyer. All her knowledge, Latino upbringing, class and work experience, and extracurricular activities like speech and debate competitions, along with watching her abuela chant audiences with poetry readings, seemed to click. It was like putting together the ultimate performance. Her job was to convince the audience, the jury, that what she said was truth. She prepared well. She tried to read body language. She used her hands to gesture and emphasize a point or two. The cadence of her voice rose and fell depending on the information she tried to relay. The feedback she received from the jury members helped her learn her strengths and weaknesses. Working with mentors like Jose Cabranes, who had founded the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, also made her grow. He had served as counsel to the governor of Puerto Rico and was general counselor to Yale while Sonia was in law school. Charlie Haymeister, a Princeton classmate, came to meet him to work on his thesis and told Sonia all about him and his work in civil rights for Hispanics, a cause close to her heart. Sonia realized Cabranes was more than a professor. He was an actual attorney who was making a difference, doing what she aspired to do. When Charlie introduced them, Sonia was hooked by his knowledge and passion, and their discussions made her think critically of real-life issues affecting individuals and communities across the nation. After a 3-hour lunch, Cabranes asked her to come work for him during the summer. Sonia didn't hesitate. She did research for the book he was writing on U.S. citizenship and Puerto Ricans and assisted with minor legal work for the university. She learned mostly from shadowing Cabranes, the way he interacted with different groups of people, his passion for the law, and his seeming genuine interest in getting to know a person or issue behind a case. When graduation time neared, students interviewed with potential law firms. Besides excelling in her classes, Sonia had been involved with activist groups, had worked real jobs, and had experience working with real attorneys. Her resume was impressive, and she was ready for interviews. One night, Sonia sat at a dinner table with a representative from the law firm Shaw, Pittman, Potts, and Trowbridge, and other law students. The firm liked to hire from Yale because of the caliber of graduates. However, without looking at Sonia's resume or work and volunteer history, one of the firm's partners, Martin Krall, asked questions about affirmative action that Sonia thought were discriminatory. He insinuated that the only reason she was admitted to Yale was because of affirmative action. He asked whether law firms did a disservice by hiring underqualified minority students with inferior credentials who couldn't compete in the real world of lawyering, and then firing them a few years later. His rudeness and assumptions shocked Sonia. She did not make a scene that night, but she could not let his remarks go. "I thought it presumptuous and racist, quite frankly," she said. If he had checked her records, he would have seen that she graduated summa cum laude and with the Pine Award from Princeton, and had achieved high standards of excellence in other areas of her academic and professional life. Being an affirmative action recipient had only allowed her the opportunity to get into colleges like Princeton and Yale. The rest, challenging herself to excel and surpass standards of excellence, had been up to her. It was as if she had to work doubly hard to prove herself and compete. The next day, she decided to hold him accountable and stand up to his racially insensitive remarks, starting with his impression of affirmative action. First, she told him that she'd been taught manners by her mother, and that included not making others uncomfortable. Then she explained that affirmative action gave kids like her opportunity where there had been none before. His remarks were insulting, and his judgment of her and her capabilities and achievements was unfair. She was one of those kids who had made the most of her opportunity. Sonia then filed a formal complaint against the recruiter for violating Yale's anti-discrimination policy. It was a risky move because the firm had recruited from Yale grads for years, and it could deteriorate the relationship between the firm and the university. But for Sonia, it was the right thing to do. A Yale student faculty tribunal ruled in her favor and ordered the firm to issue an apology or risk being banned from on-campus recruitments of Yale Law School students. News of the incident spread across the nation. Other minority groups and organizations started speaking up about similar offensive remarks and experiences they had faced. It seemed like an anti-discrimination rally was fueled, and affirmative action recipients didn't have to remain silent to derogatory remarks aimed at their integrity or capabilities. Shaw, Pittman, Potts, and Trowbridge issued a full and public apology. The story was picked up by the Washington Post. Sonia was relieved that she was not blacklisted from other law firms. That meant that she was still considered a good candidate to hire. Even then, her career took a different turn from what she ever expected. One evening, when she was studying late on campus, she walked down a hallway in the library, and a panel on public service career paths was taking place in a conference room. Intrigued, she slowed down. The perk? Free food was offered. She decided to stay, if only to grab some cheddar cheese at the end of the spiel. The panelists spoke about public interest service and how students could give that a try versus private practice. New York District Attorney Robert Morgenthau sounded convincing. Suddenly, the idea of being in a courtroom straight out of college with her own criminal cases, rather than shadowing senior partners for years before being handed a case, sounded just like what Sonia needed to jumpstart her career. In a Perry Mason episode she saw as a girl, Hamilton Burgess, the DA who lost every week, still impressed her. He said he was proud of doing the right thing, when the guilty were convicted and the innocent set free. That belief made Sonia interested in becoming a district attorney. Morgenthau's job stirred a memory of what had first intrigued her about being a lawyer, the chance to seek justice in a courtroom. His offer resonated with her. You may have your career all planned out, but when a chance comes, you have to be flexible enough to jump. Her friends thought it was the kiss of death for her career. She wouldn't make much money. Yale law students were supposed to aspire to private practice, clerkships, or pro bono, free clinics with prison disciplinary hearings or veterans benefits. After asking Morgenthau questions about his career and the opportunities, her gut told her to take a leap of faith when he invited her to visit his offices in New York. In 1979, Sonia earned her Juris Doctorate, JD, from Yale Law School. After she passed the bar in 1980, she immediately began work as a rookie assistant district attorney in New York. All her textbooks, lessons, mock trials, and extracurricular work at Yale Law School only touched the tip of the iceberg for criminal law. Nothing prepared her for facing real-life criminal cases in real-life court. This was the first step in becoming the Latina Perry Mason in the court of law.